I waited anxiously in the living room of our Manhattan apartment, my fingers fidgeting with the pregnancy test hidden in the pocket of my waitress apron. The sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park, a view Jack constantly mentioned at parties as proof of his rising success at Reynolds Enterprises. I'd spent the morning rehearsing my words, trying to find the perfect way to tell him we were going to have a baby. The sound of his key in the lock sent my heart racing. I straightened my posture, trying to appear composed despite the tornado of emotions inside me. Jack entered, his expression already tense from what I assumed was a difficult day at the office. His loosened tie and the tight set of his jaw told me everything before he'd said a word. "Rough day?" I asked, offering him the glass of wine I'd poured minutes earlier. "The Wilson account is a nightmare," he muttered, taking the glass. His eyes narrowed when I declined my usual evening glass. "Not drinking tonight?" I took a deep breath. "Jack, I need to tell you something." My hands trembled as I pulled the pregnancy test from my pocket and held it out to him. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Jack stared at the 2 pink lines, his face a mask I couldn't read. Then, deliberately, he set his wine glass down on the coffee table with enough force that I feared it might crack. "This wasn't in the plans, Sophia," he said, his voice chillingly calm as he walked to his home office. I followed, watching as he opened the wall safe, his movements methodical as he began counting $100 bills. "Jack, I'm not asking for anything," I said, my voice breaking. "I just thought you should know." After 2 years together, I still believed we meant something to each other. Without looking at me, he extended his arm, a check dangling from his fingers like I was a waitress waiting for a tip. $5,000, the price of my silence. "This is the cost of your discretion," he said flatly. "You and this mistake won't interfere with my future in Wall Street." His words cut deeper than any knife could have. "Be realistic, Sophia. A waitress from Chicago would never fit into my world, especially not with a baby. You'd just be a burden to my career." I stood frozen in the doorway as he moved to our bedroom, watching in disbelief as he methodically pulled Armani shirts from the closet and placed them in a suitcase. "I have dinner with Elizabeth's parents tonight," he announced casually, as if he weren't dismantling my entire world. "Senator Thompson's daughter. She understands the kind of life I need to build. The board loves her, and her father has connections that can take me where I need to go." "You're leaving me?" The question escaped as a whisper, though I already knew the answer. "I'm moving to San Francisco next week. Elizabeth will come with me, obviously. The engagement ring cost more than your annual salary." He checked his Rolex. "The apartment is in my name, so you have a week to find somewhere else. Consider the check as help to start over, away from me." That night, sitting alone on the floor of the apartment that had never really been mine, I stared at the pregnancy test and check side by side. Within days, I received the formal eviction notice. Jack had wasted no time. I called my sister in Boston, the only family I had left since our parents died. "I warned you about him, didn't I?" were her first words. "Men like Jack Reynolds don't marry girls like us, Sophia. You've always been too dreamy, living in fantasies. Now you're pregnant and alone in New York. Classic." I didn't ask to stay with her. Her tone made it clear I would just be another burden, the eternal family disappointment, the failure. With Jack's check deposited, I began searching for cheap rentals while working double shifts at the restaurant. My swollen feet protested as I served customers who spent on one meal what I earned in a week. Some nights, I recognized faces from Jack's social circle. They never recognized me. I was invisible, just another anonymous waitress. In my 3rd month of pregnancy, I fainted during my shift. My manager, concerned about liability, fired me that same day. Sitting in the waiting room of the public clinic where I confirmed I was expecting twins, I made my decision. New York was his city, the East belonged to Jack, and the world that had rejected me. With the $3,800 remaining from Jack's check and a Greyhound bus ticket, I set off for Seattle. Sitting on the floor of that empty apartment, my hand on my still flat stomach, I couldn't have imagined that 15 years later I would be on the 50th floor of my own skyscraper, with the Evans name shining at the top of the tower, a name I chose to leave my past as Sophia Miller completely behind. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented until reality crashed back. The formal eviction notice had been slipped under the door just 3 days after Jack's departure. He hadn't wasted any time erasing me from his life. My hands trembled as I unfolded the official-looking document, though I'd expected nothing less. Tenant must vacate premises within 30 days, it read coldly. Even with Jack's blood money in my account, finding affordable housing in Manhattan while visibly pregnant seemed an impossible task. I doubled my shifts at Marcello's, ignoring my swollen ankles as I balanced heavy trays of overpriced pasta. The irony wasn't lost on me, serving customers who casually spent my daily wages on a bottle of wine. One evening, I recognized a woman from one of Jack's corporate parties. She'd complimented my dress once, asking if it was a designer I'd never heard of. Now, her eyes slid past me as I refilled her water glass. I was invisible, just another faceless server in a black uniform. "Table 7 needs their check," my coworker mumbled as she rushed past with flaming desserts. I nodded, making my way through the crowded dining room. The faces blurred together, wealthy couples, business associates, people from Jack's world, a world where I'd only ever been a temporary visitor, never a citizen. On my 3rd month, while carrying a tray of martinis, the room suddenly tilted. I heard glass shattering, felt cold liquid splashing my legs, then nothing. "I'm sorry, Sophia," my manager said hours later in the back office, his expression more concerned with liability than my well-being. "We can't risk having you pass out on the floor again. It's dangerous for you and costly for us." I sat in the sterile waiting room of the public clinic the following day, surrounded by women whose desperate circumstances mirrored my own. The ultrasound technician's face softened when she moved the wand across my still small belly. "Congratulations," she said gently. "You're having twins. 2 babies, 2 heartbeats, 2 lives depending entirely on me." That night, I spread out maps on my bed, researching cities with lower living costs and better opportunities. New York was Jack's city, a place where success was measured by your address and connections. The East Coast belonged to him and the world that had rejected me. With trembling fingers, I purchased a one-way Greyhound ticket to Seattle, as far from Manhattan as I could reasonably go. I packed my life into 2 suitcases, the remaining $3,800 of Jack's money carefully hidden in various pockets. As the bus pulled away from Port Authority, I watched the Manhattan skyline through the rain-streaked window. Each gleaming tower represented a dream I'd once believed possible, a life with Jack, a future together. Tears mixed with raindrops on the glass as I whispered goodbye to that naive girl from Chicago. The journey stretched endlessly, states passing outside my window like chapters closing. At every rest stop, I'd stretch my aching legs, one hand instinctively cradling my growing stomach. "We'll be okay," I whispered during a midnight stop somewhere in South Dakota, the stars brighter than I'd ever seen them in New York. "It's just us now, but that will be enough, I promise." In Nebraska, an elderly woman noticed my pregnancy and offered me her aisle seat. "How far along?" she asked kindly. 3 months, I replied. But there are two in there. Her eyes widened. Twins, and you're traveling alone? I nodded, and something in her expression, pity mixed with concern, made me turn away. I didn't need pity. I needed strength. By the time we reached Seattle, it had been raining for hours. The city welcomed me with gray skies and the steady percussion of raindrops, a fitting backdrop to my arrival. I clutched a piece of paper with the address of a cheap boarding house in Rainier Valley, recommended by another passenger. "Pregnant and alone?" the elderly landlady asked, eyeing my midsection suspiciously. "How many months?" "3," I answered, clutching my suitcases tighter. "I have first and last month's rent." She hesitated before finally nodding. "Room 7, shared bathroom down the hall." That first night in Seattle, I lay on a narrow bed in a room smaller than Jack's walk-in closet. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling a flutter that might have been my imagination or the first movements of my babies. "He'll regret abandoning us," I whispered into the darkness. "One day, we'll show him our worth." I fell asleep in that unfamiliar bed in Seattle, never imagining that this rainy city that had received me in my most desperate moment would become the foundation of the technological empire that would one day make Jack Reynolds choke on his bourbon when our paths crossed again. I still felt the dampness of Seattle clinging to me as I pushed open the door of Raindrop Cafe, 7 months pregnant and desperate for work. The woman behind the counter, Eleanor, according to her name tag, looked up from the espresso machine with kind eyes that assessed my condition immediately. "Help wanted sign's been up for 3 weeks, she said, gesturing to the window. "I'm guessing you need this job pretty badly." "I do," I admitted, resting one hand on my swollen belly. "I have experience as a barista and waitress." Eleanor studied me for a moment, then nodded. "It's not charity, dear. It's one woman helping another. You can start tomorrow, lighter shifts, and there's a small room in the back if you need somewhere to stay." I almost wept with relief. The room in Eleanor's cafe became my sanctuary, a tiny space with just enough room for a cot and my few belongings, but infinitely better than the boarding house where other tenants complained about my midnight bathroom trips. During daylight hours, I served coffee with practiced efficiency, ignoring the curious or pitying glances from customers eyeing my growing belly. Some would leave generous tips with murmured words of encouragement. Others averted their eyes, as if my condition might be contagious. Nights belonged to my computer. While the cafe slept below, I hunched over my laptop, the screen illuminating my exhausted face as I coded. My degrees in computer science and data security, those cute hobbies Jack had dismissed, were becoming my lifeline. I sent emails to small local businesses, offering basic security solutions at rock-bottom prices to build my portfolio. The first payment for freelance work, $200 for securing a florist's customer database, felt like winning the lottery. I stared at the notification, tears blurring my vision. By my 8th month, I'd saved enough to view a tiny studio apartment with a kitchenette smaller than Jack's wine cooler. The landlord eyed my belly suspiciously. "Due date?" he asked bluntly. 3 weeks, I answered, trying to appear stable and reliable despite feeling neither. He hesitated, then nodded. "First month, last month, and security deposit. No noise complaints." The day my contraction started, I was refilling coffee beans during the morning rush. The first pain doubled me over, coffee beans scattering across the floor like dark raindrops. "Eleanor," I gasped, clutching the counter. "I think it's time." What followed was a blur of hospital corridors and medical jargon. In the delivery room, there was no hand to hold, no partner to coach me through each excruciating push. Only a kind-faced nurse who wiped my forehead and urged me forward. "One more push," she encouraged. "You're doing great, Mama." Emma arrived first, tiny and red-faced, her indignant cry filling the room. Ethan followed 7 minutes later, quieter but equally perfect. Holding them in my arms, exhausted beyond measure, I made my first promise as a mother. "You'll never know what it's like to be abandoned," I whispered against their downy heads. "And one day we'll prove he was wrong about everything." The first 2 years passed in a sleepless haze. I returned to the cafe when the twins were 3 weeks old, setting up a makeshift playpen in Eleanor's office. During their naps, I served customers. When they slept at night, I coded until my vision blurred. On rare free moments, I studied new programming languages and security protocols, preparing for opportunities I couldn't yet see. My breakthrough came unexpectedly. A regular customer, a tech startup owner named Marcus, mentioned a security breach costing his company thousands. "Our IT team can't figure it out," he sighed, stirring his cappuccino. I grabbed a napkin, scribbling a solution. "Try this approach," I suggested, sliding it across the counter. He stared at the diagram, then at me. "You're a barista or a programmer?" "Both," I answered with a small smile. "For now." That napkin became my first major contract. Within months, I'd saved enough to leave the cafe and found Evan Security Solutions, using my maternal grandmother's surname, not because I was ashamed of being a Miller, but because I needed something completely disconnected from my past. On the eve of the twins' 3rd birthday, after tucking them into bed in our new 2-bedroom apartment, I opened my laptop and searched for Jack Reynolds. There he was, smiling beside Elizabeth in a social media post from Reynolds Enterprises, now promoted to vice president. The article praised his brilliant future and impeccable strategic decision-making. I closed the laptop and gazed at my sleeping children. "He only made one right decision in his life," I whispered, "letting us go." That night, I promised myself that someday Jack Reynolds would look at me and see not the waitress he discarded, but a force he could never have imagined, not for revenge, but because I deserved to prove, to myself, to my children, and to the world, that he had been wrong about my worth. 3 years later, as I was signing the contract for my first real office, a small room with stained carpet, but my name on the door, I didn't know that that small company I started at my dining table while the twins slept would one day become the key to our inevitable reunion. I signed the lease with trembling fingers, barely able to contain my excitement as the building manager handed me the keys. 5 years had passed since the twins' birth, and this moment, standing in my very own office space with Evan Security Solutions freshly painted on the door, felt monumental. "Congratulations," the manager said, clearly unimpressed by the small room with its stained carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. He couldn't see what I saw, the foundation of something extraordinary. My first hire was David Chen, a recent computer science graduate whose resume had been rejected by every major tech firm in Seattle. During his interview, he fidgeted nervously in the folding chair I'd purchased from a garage sale. "Why would you want to work for a startup that doesn't even have furniture yet?" I asked him directly. His answer sealed the deal. "Because your security architecture proposal is the most innovative I've seen. The big companies are too comfortable to take these risks." While building my business, the twins started kindergarten. That first morning, standing at the elementary school gates, I fought back tears as they marched confidently into the building, matching backpacks bouncing. "Mommy has a big meeting," I explained, kneeling to hug them goodbye. "I'll pick you up right after." I barely made it to my presentation at Seattle Community Bank, where 4 men in identical suits regarded my discount rack blazer with poorly disguised skepticism. "Ms. Evans, your proposal is interesting," the oldest executive said, "but we typically work with established security firms." I swallowed my pride and persisted. Established firms offer established solutions to evolving problems. I'm offering you protection against threats that don't even exist yet. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. Ms. Evans, it's Thomas from SCB. We've been hacked. Everything's compromised. Please help us. I worked 48 straight hours, sustained by vending machine coffee and determination, coding a solution that isolated and neutralized the breach while preserving customer data integrity. When I finally emerged, bleary-eyed but victorious, the bank president was waiting. "How did you know our vulnerability was in the transfer protocols?" he asked, amazed. "Because that's where I would have attacked," I answered simply. The Seattle Tech Journal ran a front-page story, "Local Startup Saves Bank from Cybersecurity Disaster." My phone didn't stop ringing for days. Success came with costs. When Ethan starred in the kindergarten play as a talking tree, his little face fell when he scanned the audience and saw our elderly neighbor instead of me. I'd been trapped in an emergency meeting with North Pacific Retail, whose security director had finally returned my calls after the bank incident. "I'm so sorry I missed your play," I told Ethan that night, pulling out the ice cream I'd bought as a peace offering. "It's okay," he said with a maturity that broke my heart. "Ms. Eleanor recorded it for you." I promised them a full day of fun that weekend, the zoo, ice cream, and a movie. Their instant forgiveness only deepened my guilt. One Tuesday afternoon, my makeshift reception area, essentially a desk in the hallway, buzzed with unexpected energy. David poked his head into my office, eyes wide. "Lawrence Bennett is here to see you," he whispered urgently. "Who?" I asked, frantically closing the browser window where I'd been checking the twins' school lunch menu. "The venture capitalist. The one who funded Techscape and Mobile Vault." Bennett was impeccably dressed, looking out of place in our humble office. He studied our whiteboard filled with security algorithms before turning to me. "I've been tracking your work, Ms. Evans. Your adaptive security approach is revolutionary." By meeting's end, he offered $250,000 for 15% of my company, enough to hire real staff, lease proper offices, and finally pay myself a living wage. That night, watching Emma and Ethan sleep in their shared bedroom, I whispered the promise that had become my mantra. "This is just the beginning, my loves. One day, the world will know our name." When I signed that first investment contract, I didn't know that 8 years later I would be turning down a $50 million acquisition offer from the same Reynolds Enterprises that Jack ran, looking into the eyes of the executive sent to negotiate and saying, "Tell your CEO that Evans isn't for sale, especially not to him." I cut the ribbon on our new office with a professional smile, though inside I was bursting with pride. My team of 30 employees applauded as the twins, now 8 years old, stood beside me. 3 years after Lawrence Bennett's investment, Evans Security Solutions had become a respected name in cybersecurity. "Congratulations, Sophia," my newly formed executive team said, champagne glasses raised in our legitimate conference room with views of downtown Seattle. Minutes later, I was racing from the celebration to pick up the twins from school, laptop in one hand and their science projects in the other. The balancing act never ended. CEO during business hours, single mother the rest. "Ms. Evans, do you have a moment?" Ethan's music teacher waved me over during pickup. "Your son has extraordinary talent. He needs private lessons to develop properly." That same evening, I sat with Emma at our kitchen table, watching in amazement as she breezed through advanced equations. "Mom, this is too easy," she complained, her 8-year-old confidence both amusing and impressive. "Can I try the next chapter?" Between their academic schedules and my growing company, sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. Yet we were thriving until the Henderson meeting. "Miss, A security company led by a single mother? Henderson smirked across the conference table. Doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Security requires focus, and your situation suggests divided attention. The room temperature seemed to drop as my executive team shifted uncomfortably. It's Ms. Evans to you, I replied, rising slowly from my chair. And it's precisely because I protect what I love most that our security is unmatched. A parent knows threats others might overlook. His patronizing smile faltered. Evans doesn't need clients who confuse prejudice with due diligence, I concluded, ending the meeting with a gesture toward the door. There are many companies who would happily take your money without challenging your assumptions. We're not one of them. After Henderson left, my operations director approached, wide-eyed. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen a CEO do. You just walked away from a 7-figure contract. We'll get other contracts, I replied. We won't compromise our dignity. That night, exhausted but determined, I checked the twins' homework while reviewing financial reports. Emma and Ethan were asleep when I flipped on CNBC for market updates. Jack's face appeared without warning, discussing Reynolds Enterprises' expansion into Asian markets. His features had hardened, success leaving its mark in the slight furrow between his brows and the authoritative set of his jaw. My hand moved involuntarily toward the screen before I pulled it back as if burned. The voice that had once whispered false promises now spoke of market penetration and strategic partnerships. I realized with unsettling clarity that despite my success, despite the years between us, some small part of me remained tethered to the pain he'd caused. "Who's that man, Mommy?" Emma asked, suddenly appearing in her pajamas. I quickly switched off the television. "Nobody important, sweetheart. Just business news. Why aren't you asleep?" Later that week, I proposed our expansion into critical infrastructure security during our board meeting, a move that would put us in direct competition with companies exponentially larger than ours. "This is risky," our chief financial officer warned. "Companies like Global Secure have government connections we can't match." "I survived and thrived when everyone bet against me," I replied, passion rising in my voice. "This company will do the same. We don't need the right connections. We need the right solutions." The board approved my proposal, though their reservations were clear in their cautious glances. They didn't yet understand what drove me, that proving Jack wrong had become the engine powering my ambition. I turned off the TV when Jack's face disappeared, not knowing that in just 7 years we would be face to face on a stage in San Diego, him initially failing to recognize the waitress he'd abandoned, while I would instantly recognize the man whose cruel words had, ironically, propelled me toward success he could never have predicted. I stared at myself in the glossy reflection of the Forbes magazine cover, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. "Sophia Evans, From Adversity to Empire," the headline proclaimed. My publicist was touching up my lipstick while I simultaneously discussed quarterly numbers on my phone. 10 years had passed since Jack's abandonment, and Evans Tech Solutions, no longer just a security firm, was now valued at hundreds of millions, with offices in Seattle, Austin, and Boston. "The Asia-Pacific expansion projections look strong," I told my CFO, signaling to the photographer I needed 1 more minute. "Move forward with the Singapore office." That evening, I received a call from the twins' private school. The director's voice carried the practiced patience of someone used to dealing with busy parents. "Ms. Evans, while Emma and Ethan are extraordinary students, we've noticed you've missed the last 3 parent conferences. Their teachers would appreciate your involvement." The guilt was immediate and familiar, the constant tug-of-war between my responsibilities as CEO and mother. I promised to attend the next meeting, knowing my calendar was already impossibly full. Later that week, I canceled dinner with the twins to handle an emergency call with international investors. 10-year-old Emma and Ethan nodded with the resigned understanding of children who had grown accustomed to disappointment, though I promised to make it up to them over the weekend. I watched Ethan's violin recital via live stream from my office, catching the moment his eyes searched the audience, his expression falling slightly when he found only his babysitter in the seat I should have occupied. My heart contracted painfully as I sent a quick text. "You were magnificent. So proud of you. Sorry I couldn't be there." The following day, Emma bounded into my home office, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, look! I developed a new pattern recognition algorithm for my science project." She explained the complex mathematics with infectious enthusiasm, but my phone buzzed insistently, pulling my attention away. I tried to focus on both simultaneously, nodding at her explanation while scanning the urgent email from Tokyo. Emma's voice faltered. "You're not really listening, are you?" Before I could answer, my phone rang with the school's number. "Ms. Evans, your son collapsed during rehearsal. We've called an ambulance." The world stopped. I abandoned a board meeting mid-sentence, racing through Seattle traffic with my heart in my throat. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly as I ran toward the pediatric emergency department. Ethan looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, pale and fragile, with tubes and monitors surrounding him. "Pneumonia," the doctor said. "Severe." He'd been hiding symptoms for days, not wanting to bother me. "I knew you'd come, Mom," he whispered, his voice weak but certain. For 5 days I never left his side, working on my laptop while he slept, gradually recognizing the destructive patterns I'd fallen into. I was becoming what I despised, prioritizing success over people who mattered. Emma visited daily after school, her usual confidence dimmed by worry for her twin. On the 3rd day, she curled beside me in the uncomfortable hospital chair. "You're always busy, Mom," she said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like the company is more important than us." My eyes filled with tears as I pulled her close. "You and Ethan are the reason for everything I do." "I'm so sorry if I've made you doubt that." That night, as Ethan's fever finally broke, my email pinged with a message I never expected. "Formal acquisition proposal, Reynolds Enterprises." Without opening it, I deleted the email, the decision instinctive and visceral. My CFO called the next morning, bewildered. "You didn't even look at the offer? Sophia, it was a $50 million proposal." "Evans isn't for sale," I replied firmly, "especially not to Reynolds." I didn't explain that some prices were too high, some compromises too costly. Selling to Jack would mean that everything I'd built had been about him, when I needed it to be about us, my children and me. As I watched Ethan finally sleeping peacefully, his fever subsiding, I promised myself I would rebalance my life, never imagining that 5 years later, when Evans Tech Solutions would surpass Reynolds Enterprises in market value, I would finally be ready for the confrontation I had been avoiding for so many years. The 5 years since Ethan's hospitalization passed in a whirlwind of deliberate changes. After watching my son's pale face against those stark hospital sheets, I'd vowed to restructure both my company and my life. Now, as the twins celebrated their 12th birthday, I could finally attend their special events without constantly checking my phone. Today, I sat proudly in the audience as Ethan performed a complicated violin concerto, my hands free of devices, my attention undivided. When he finished, I was the first on my feet, applauding until my palms hurt. "You were magnificent," I whispered, hugging him tightly backstage. 2 days later, I cheered just as enthusiastically when Emma took first place at the National Mathematics Olympiad, her algorithm solving problems that challenged doctoral students. "I knew you could do it," I told her, pulling her close. "I'm so incredibly proud of you." Our new routine included sacred family dinners every Tuesday and Thursday, where phones remained in a basket by the door and we discussed our days without interruption. The twins flourished under this consistent attention, and I rediscovered the joy of simply being their mother, not just their provider. At Evans Tech headquarters, I'd learned to delegate, trusting my executive team with projects I once would have micromanaged. Our new building dominated Seattle's skyline, with a dedicated space where the twins could study after school while waiting for me to finish work. "Mom," Ethan asked one evening, pushing food around his plate, "everyone at school has a dad. Some have two. Why don't we have any?" The question I'd been dreading for years hung in the air. Emma stopped eating, watching me intently. "You always say he wasn't ready to be a father," she added quietly. "But who is he? Where is he now?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "He was someone important in the business world. He chose his career over us." Relief washed over their faces. The understanding that they hadn't been abandoned because they were somehow inadequate, but because of someone else's selfish choices. Later that night, alone in my study, I unlocked an encrypted drive containing old photos, including one of Jack and me in happier times. His arm was around my shoulders, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. I hardly recognized that naive girl from Chicago who believed in promises whispered against her skin. This unexpected conversation with the twins catalyzed something within me. 2 months later, I launched the Evans Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers in technology. At the inaugural ceremony, I stood before gathered journalists and beneficiaries, my voice steady. "No one should have to choose between professional dreams and family," I declared, unveiling our scholarship program. A reporter raised his hand during the Q&A. "Was your own experience as a single mother the inspiration for this foundation, Ms. Evans?" I hesitated momentarily, then nodded. "Yes, I was abandoned while pregnant 14 years ago. What was meant to weaken me ultimately strengthened me." The next day's headline read, "Billionaire CEO reveals past as abandoned single mother. I turned rejection into empire." That evening, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. "Sophia, I saw your story in the news. I worked with Jack Reynolds. There are things you should know." I stared at that email for hours before finally responding, not knowing that this simple exchange would trigger a series of events that would put me face to face with Jack just 1 year later, under circumstances neither of us could have predicted. The image of Jack's face on the television screen faded as I turned it off, but the echo of his voice lingered in my mind. 15 years had transformed us both, him into a CEO struggling to maintain relevance, me into someone he wouldn't recognize. Now, standing in my penthouse office on the 50th floor of Evans Tower, I watched Seattle's skyline glitter below me like the empire it had become. My assistant entered with an elegant cream envelope. "The Global Technology Forum Committee sent this personally. They want you as their keynote speaker." I smiled, opening the invitation with practiced ease. My eyes scanned the prestigious event details until they froze on the list of other speakers. Jack Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Enterprises. My heart skipped despite my best efforts to remain unmoved. 15 years since I'd seen him in person. 15 years since he'd handed me that check and walked away from his unborn children. I set the invitation down and turned to my computer, quickly searching for recent news about Reynolds Enterprises. The headlines confirmed what industry whispers had suggested. Reynolds stock down 65% over 5 years. Board questions leadership as innovation stalls. Resistance to change costs market share. His corporate photo appeared on the company website, older but still handsome, with the same confident smile that once convinced me we had a future. The smile that lied. I called Emma at Stanford, listening to her excited chatter about quantum cryptography advancements. At 15, my daughter had already been accepted into an honors program that regularly published her research. I could hear the passion in her voice, so similar to my own. "Will you come to the forum in San Diego next month?" I asked. "Your quantum security work aligns perfectly with the themes." "Absolutely. My professor was just talking about submitting our paper to the conference." Next, I video called Ethan, who was practicing for his upcoming performance in La Jolla, coincidentally close to the forum's location. At 15, my son had already performed twice at Carnegie Hall, his violin speaking a language of emotion that moved audiences to tears. "My performance is 2 days after your keynote," he reminded me. Perfect timing. That night, I stood before my closet, assessing options for the forum. My fingers lingered on a Chanel suit purchased in Milan. Elegant, powerful, discreetly expensive. Not to impress him, I told myself, but because this was who I was now, CEO of the 17th most valuable technology company in America, according to last month's Forbes. During my therapy session the next morning, Dr. Grant asked the question I'd been avoiding. "After 15 years, do you still feel you need to prove something to him?" I considered this carefully. It's not about him anymore. It's about closing a chapter that's been open too long. On the private company jet flying to San Diego, I reviewed my keynote presentation while repeatedly returning to the page with Reynolds Enterprises information. When my phone rang, I was almost grateful for the interruption. "Sophia, did you know Reynolds is for sale?" Daniel, my CFO, sounded excited. "Inside information, hasn't hit the press yet." "How much?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Well below market value. They're desperate. Liquidity problems, mounting debt." "Prepare a proposal," I decided instantly. "We'll use the acquisition fund." "Are you sure? It's not our usual segment." "I'm sure. Their infrastructure complements our expansion into financial services." I didn't mention that I knew that company better than he imagined, that one day, long ago, Jack Reynolds had told me I had no place in the business world. The Ritz-Carlton in La Jolla welcomed us with the discreet efficiency reserved for VIP guests. Presidential suite, fresh flowers, fruit basket, with a card thanking me for my participation. As I unpacked, smoothing the dress I would wear to the opening cocktail reception, I knew that in less than 24 hours I would be face to face with the man who once said I would be a burden to his career, never imagining that I was about to purchase the company he had run into the ground. I adjusted my diamond necklace in the elevator, my heart pounding despite my outward composure. Emma and Ethan stood beside me, both looking significantly older than their 15 years in their elegant evening attire. Emma's hair was swept into a perfect chignon, while Ethan's height and quiet confidence already turned heads. These extraordinary children, my greatest achievements, were about to unknowingly meet their father. The elevator doors opened to reveal the glittering ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. The cocktail reception was already in full swing, conversations humming beneath crystal chandeliers. "Sophia Evans!" The event organizer rushed toward us, her enthusiasm almost comical. "It's such an honor to finally meet you in person. Your cybersecurity keynote is the most anticipated session of the forum." I smiled politely as she guided us through the room, introducing us to other speakers and CEOs. All the while, my eyes discreetly scanned the crowd, part of me hoping to delay the inevitable confrontation. "Mom," Emma whispered, subtly gesturing toward the bar, "isn't that the Reynolds CEO? We studied his company's decline in my business class." My breath caught as I spotted him. Jack Reynolds, 15 years older, with distinguished gray at his temples, still carrying himself with that confident posture that once captivated me. His suit, which even from a distance I could tell was inferior to those he wore when we were together, betrayed Reynolds Enterprises' financial struggles. "Yes, that's him," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Should we introduce ourselves?" Ethan suggested, always polite. It would be interesting to hear his perspective on traditional markets. Before I could respond, the organizer returned. "Ms. Evans, I'd like to introduce you to some of our sponsors." She guided us directly toward Jack. Time slowed as our eyes met for the first time in 15 years. I watched the precise moment confusion crossed his face, looking at me without truly seeing me at first. Then the gradual recognition, like rising waves, surprise, disbelief, and finally something close to shock. "Sophia?" The bourbon in his glass visibly trembled. "Sophia Miller?" "Evans," I corrected smoothly. "Sophia Evans. It's a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Reynolds." The organizer looked confused. "You two know each other?" "Old acquaintances," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "From New York, many years ago." Jack appeared to be seeing a ghost. His eyes darted between me and the twins, and I could see the exact moment the mathematics made sense in his mind. 15 years. Teenagers. His gaze fixed on Emma, recognizing his own eyes reflected back at him. "These are my children," I said calmly. "Emma and Ethan." You're, he stammered, the bourbon finally slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor. "Mind the glass," I cautioned, as a waiter hurried to clean the mess. "Emma is at Stanford," I continued, as if we were having a perfectly normal conversation. "Honors program in computer science, and Ethan will be performing in La Jolla the day after tomorrow. He's a violinist." The twins, polite as always, extended their hands to greet him, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake occurring. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reynolds," Emma said. "We studied your company case last semester. Fascinating how resistance to innovation can drastically impact market value." Jack barely managed to shake her hand, his eyes fixed on the features she clearly inherited from him, the face shape, the jawline, the exact color of her eyes. "You," he began, looking at me. How did I become CEO of a billion-dollar company after you discarded me with a $5,000 check?" I completed in a low voice, for his ears only. "Determination, talent, and the extra motivation of proving you were completely wrong about me." The color drained entirely from his face. I saw his nervous glance around the room, probably searching for his wife, Elizabeth, the senator's daughter, who would be a much more suitable partner for his ambitions. "My children don't know who you are," I informed him casually. "To them, you're just another CEO in financial trouble." "Mom," Ethan interrupted gently, "isn't that Dr. Chen from MIT? I'd really like to discuss computational acoustics with her." "Of course, darling. Why don't you and Emma go introduce yourselves? I'll join you in a minute." When the twins moved away, Jack finally regained some of his composure. They're mine? Biologically? Yes. In every other aspect that matters? No." I took a sip of champagne. "You relinquished any rights to them when you said we would be a burden to your career. Remember those words, Jack? I never forgot." While leaving the stage to thunderous applause, my phone vibrated with confirmation. "Proposal accepted by Reynolds Board. Vote for CEO removal scheduled for tomorrow." Perfect timing for the conversation Jack now clearly desperately wanted to have with me, unaware that the twins had just asked me why Mr. Reynolds seemed so familiar. I woke early the next morning, watching the sun rise over the Pacific from my suite's balcony. The financial news channels were already buzzing with speculation about the surprise acquisition. Analysts discussing the brilliant strategy of CEO Sophia Evans in injecting innovation into a declining traditional company. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone chimed with a message from Jack. "We need to talk. Please." I ignored it, continuing to read the morning reports Daniel had sent. The board vote was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and we already had confirmation that 9 of the 12 members supported the leadership change. Emma wandered onto the balcony, still in her pajamas, laptop in hand, her expression puzzled. "Mom, something strange is happening. I'm getting dozens of connection requests from people affiliated with Reynolds." I took a deep breath. This moment was inevitable. "Emma, we need to talk. You and Ethan. There's something you should know." When Ethan joined us, I told them everything. About New York, about Jack, about the $5,000 check and the cruel words, about how I never wanted them to grow up resentful or defined by their father's rejection. "So, the man from last night, he's our biological father?" Ethan asked, his voice calm as always. "Yes." "And you bought his company?" Emma questioned, her eyes, so like Jack's, sparkling with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "It's a strategic investment," I explained. "Reynolds has valuable intellectual property that aligns with our expansion plans." "But the coincidence is—" Emma began. "There is no coincidence," I completed. "When I learned he would be at this forum, I asked Daniel to investigate Reynolds' financial situation. The acquisition makes business sense, but I acknowledge there's a personal element." I was surprised by their reaction, not anger or resentment, but analytical curiosity. Emma especially seemed to be processing the information like a complex programming problem. "Does he know we're his children?" Ethan asked. "He figured it out last night, and he's probably panicking now, imagining how this will affect his life." "Did you plan all this as revenge?" Emma's direct question made me smile. "No, sweetheart. I planned it as poetic justice. There's a difference." I sipped my coffee. Revenge would be destroying him. Justice is showing his judgment was wrong. About me, about you, about what constitutes value. My phone rang. It was the hotel reception. "Ms. Evans, Mr. Reynolds is here, insisting on seeing you." I looked at my children. "The choice is yours. Do you want to meet him?" After a brief silent conference, that almost telepathic communication twins often develop, they agreed. "Let's get dressed first," Emma said, ever practical. "I'm not meeting my biological father in pajamas." 20 minutes later, we sat in the suite's living room, Jack looking uncomfortable on the sofa, his bloodshot eyes suggesting a sleepless night. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, looking nervously at the twins. "I don't know where to start." "Perhaps with the last 15 years?" Emma suggested, her voice surprisingly neutral. Jack swallowed hard. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left your mother. I was young, ambitious, and incredibly stupid." "We know the story," Ethan interrupted politely. "Our mother told us everything this morning. The check, the words, the abandonment." "She also told us about the acquisition," Emma added. "I must say, it's a brilliant strategy from a business perspective. Your financial processing patents integrate perfectly with our security platform." Jack blinked, clearly surprised by her analytical tone. "You're extraordinary, both of you." "Yes, we are," Emma agreed without false modesty. "Our mother made sure of that." "I want to be part of your lives," Jack said abruptly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to know you. I want to make up for lost time." "And how do you propose to do that?" I asked calmly. 15 years can't be recovered with a few dinners and expensive gifts, Jack." "I have resources," he began, then stopped, realizing the absurdity of the statement. "Or I had. I don't know what I have anymore after the acquisition." Resources were never the problem, I observed. It was choice. You chose your career over your family. You chose status over responsibility. And now you have neither, Emma completed, leaning forward. What do you think you can offer that we don't already have? The direct question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. For the first time, Jack Reynolds appeared completely speechless. As the plane took off from San Diego, I looked at my extraordinary children and the future of the company I'd built from nothing, finally feeling the weight of Jack's words completely dissipating. Not because I had defeated him, but because I'd finally understood that my journey was never about him, but about discovering the strength that had always existed within me, waiting for the adversity that would reveal it.